Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today's episode is about how change comes when you understand that your voice counts. Today I'm joined by a wonderful guest and friend who I got to meet and get to know when we were studying for our masters in the UK. Lucy is a case manager at the Fathers and Families Support Center in St. Louis, Missouri, as well as a Fulbright alumni who earned her MRes in Criminology from the University of Manchester. It was so great to catch up with Lucy and to learn about the work she's doing. So without further ado, let's dive right into this conversation featuring Lucy Grimshaw.
Who am I? So I'm Lucy Grimshaw. I am currently working as a case manager at a non-for-profit where we help men and women get back in their children's lives through life skills classes that go for 6 weeks. I predominantly do the resource side of things, and I really appreciate and enjoy that. I also have a master's in research from the University of Manchester, which I did through Fulbright with you, Lily. And yes, and then I have 2 bachelor's degrees in public policy and social work from a university in my hometown.
That is wonderful. That's a great place to get started. And you are one of the rare guests, I would say, that I've actually gotten to meet before this, which is awesome. Feels more like a catch up. But I would love to know more about what inspired you to get started with all of the work you're doing now. I think you have so many things that we're going to be able to touch on as far as your research and the work that you're doing. But what inspired you to get started with all of this and to really make change in this way that you are?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, which I've been thinking about before I came on because I was like, I'm sure this is going to be asked. I think I've always had a bent towards making people feel seen and heard from a young age. I am adopted, and I feel like a lot of times you can be confused on your own identity. And so you have to make one for yourself. And so I kind of became very aware of people who were either being misrepresented, unable to speak for themselves. And I really often would stand at the gap when I was younger for people who I felt like were not being represented fairly by, first of all, getting to know them in my own time when I was like little. And then letting them share more of their stories with others when they may be like misunderstood or there may be some like misconception. And I think my mom is actually a white British woman and I love her dearly, but it gave me a really fantastic view on race and racial issues in the US. I definitely grew up understanding racial issues, but it kind of took me having to go through it myself and realize that I was liking a Black woman, like 14 when Michael Brown was unfortunately killed by the police was when I first kind of realized, oh, I am really Black because I'd been in predominantly white spaces. And so I had like 2 other women who were like sisters to me, who were also Black, and we started to have conversations more about what does it look like to be Black, especially in predominantly white institutions or churches? And then I think really where I landed before college was I watched the show When They See Us by Ava DuVernay about 5 men of color who were accused of raping a woman. And they were innocent and they weren't exonerated, but definitely harrowing to watch. And I think that's when I decided enough is enough. And I know it happened in the 90s, but I was like, yeah, we gotta actually do something about this in mass incarceration. So I think that kind of gives you a through line up to college to kind of explain more of the social justice side of me. I also was obsessed with hairspray. So that was my little cliche with my mom growing up. That's how we really started talking about racial issues together. And then the only other thing I can think of is my mom and I did read alouds for school. And so she would learn the Negro spirituals for like Harriet Tubman and what we were reading and stuff like that. And she would take the time. And so I think that also really helped me just understand that cultures that are not predominantly from that culture or people who are of a different race can actually be intentional to make time to learn about another culture and do it justice. And I think those are probably my best memories. I know that's a lot, but There we
Oh,
go.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Your mom sounds like an amazing woman.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, also Hairspray. I also love Hairspray, but I think it's a
Okay.
wonderful little plug. I don't think it's been talked
Yeah.
about on the show before, so thank you,
Oh,
Lizzie.
I love the Hairspray so much. I remember actually asking one of my friends because 'cause we'd watch it over and over again. Oh, and To Kill a Mockingbird, that was another one. And I actually got to take my mom to see it for her birthday, which was, like, a huge thing, so that was really cool. But I asked my friend who's white, I was like, "Would you ever wanna trade places with me?" And she was like, probably not." And then I was like, "Okay, there we go." I think I was, like, 10 at that point, so kinda like that conscious awareness of just, like, different races and stuff kind of came into play there.
Yeah, that is so
So,
interesting. Now I wanna ask, kind of continue that. Can you tell me about what your
yeah,
college experience was like? And then, of course, your master's. Can you tell me about
yeah,
some of the research that you've done, some of the work that you did, when you were kind of going through your degrees? Tell me a little bit about that.
yeah.
I know some of it, but tell me more.
So I'm gonna just do undergrad first, and then I'll
Perfect.
devote time fully to, like, my master's and getting there. So undergrad, I went in undecided. I knew that I wanted to potentially do something with social work. I wasn't really sure what, but I've always had this, like, burning desire to keep activism on the ground while also utilizing research. That's been something that's just been innate in me. I've always loved research, but I've also always done protests. I've done more on the ground things to ensure people's needs are being met and that they're actually being able to have their voices being represented and not me necessarily speaking through them without prior knowledge. I think I learned a lot of that from my mom and just her growing up with me as a black child and just her having to learn more as everyone does. Nobody really knows everything. So I went in undecided. I began taking a lot of courses. So basically, one of my favorite courses that I did was exploring the civil rights era. So we did it for our honors college class, and we were able to go to several places down south. I cannot remember everywhere, but I know we went to Selma. This was my freshman year, so I cannot remember everything. It's detailed or fuzzy, but we went to Selma and several other places down south. I had already done a little bit of exploration because my mom actually surprised me for my 18th birthday with a trip to Atlanta, and I got to meet MLK's personal driver. I still am in contact with him, so shout out to John Hope. I love him so much. And I got to speak with John Lewis on the phone because they were besties, so rest in peace. So I had a little bit of prior knowledge because of that to kind of what was going on and everything like that. I always go all in, so when I research in depth. So a lot of it I already knew, but it was cool because on the bus, going down there, we'd watch videos about every single event. So if we were going to where the bombing happened, we had stuff already, we'd already kind of seen on the screen what it looked like in the past, and then we were coming in the present. And I think that made it a lot more somber just to be like, yeah, this did happen here. It wasn't like just this abstract like experience. I know we went to where Martin Luther King was unfortunately shot and killed. We saw a video before that, before we went. So, and I actually was able to do like a really cool St. Louis Public Radio interview. So, if anyone's interested, I did talk a little bit more about it there with, I think, like the two facilitators of the trip, and they're pretty cool. Then after that, I was like, we did something else, and it basically was, a project, like a capstone within the class, and so I began looking into segregation in schools as of today. So there was this podcast called The Problems We All Live With, and, it's an NPR podcast, and so I was able to kinda look at the discrimination currently in my hometown around high schools and schools. And it kind of definitely launched me into definitely wanting to study social work. That was like yep, this is something that I really want to do. But then I also really wanted to study public policy because I wanted to understand how the law impacts other people. And so I was able to kind of do both. I asked my advisor if that was gonna be okay. We were gonna do them both as, like, a major and minor, but I ended up doing a lot of classes in the summer, so I was able to, complete them both, which was fantastic. I think the only other thing I can really think of off the bat is my first year, I was also able to speak. We have, like, an MLK celebration, and I was able to share my essay there, and I think that also kinda just, like, really empowered me forward. And then I guess the other thing that there was so much my junior and senior year. We're getting to the time where Breonna Taylor was murdered, tons of stuff going on with the election. We're also in the midst of COVID. So there were a lot of opportunities if you were willing to look at the disenfranchisement of so many people in society, especially Black and Brown people, Native Americans, like people, BIPOC people. And I think that that time was really painful and isolating for so many, but it gave me kind of more room to listen instead of speaking about like what experiences were going on in the world at the time. And it kind of gave me more of a light. At that point, I had already decided I was doing both majors. And so it was kind of just like at that point I was just like figuring out like where can I go from here? What's my calling? How can I help other people? And I was honored to receive an award from the chancellor for service. And I think that just like kind of propelled me even more forward. It was the Newman Civic Fellowship. And I became really close with my dean through that of the Honors College. Shout out to Ed Sanchez. And I think at that point, that's when him and I started talking through, okay, you're in your junior year. What do you really want to do moving forwards? How do you really want to take a step to help other people? And so he kind of became a mentor for me in that space. And so by the end, I remember my last thing I did, I had him as an independent study and we looked at all of James Baldwin, and it was a really cool experience. It was kind of sweet to end my college career with that, and then we started looking more into Fulbright, like senior year. So that's that, I guess.
That's wonderful. That's amazing. I
Yeah,
guess then the natural thing is tell me about your research when you were in the UK, when you were doing your
yeah.
master's. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with how I got the Fulbright because I think that's kind of important for my story specifically. So I actually applied for it twice. The first time I didn't get it because I had no idea how they worked, and I applied for the open award. Like, who does that? Um, but the first time I didn't get it. But between the first and second time I applied, a ton of stuff happened in my life. One of my a close friend had a PTSD, I guess you would say, like, episode, which led to him being killed by the police. It was, I think, like, the first time I was really like, this really hits close to home because of the PTSD, the refugee status, him trying to build himself a better life, and him not being able to, unfortunately, achieve that in America. And it kind of, I think, was really my like entryway to be like, I gotta do more. If that means I study somewhere else and get some more experience, that's fine. And I also was working at a psychiatric rehabilitation home with predominantly older Black men. And so I kind of got to see, because all of these men had been in mental institutions and had been deemed not guilty by reason of insanity. So I was kind of able to see their journey. And I'm from St. Louis. So I got to see like how the St. Louis system treated them, to get them to where they were then, and kind of helped them through their journey afterwards. Like they had really in-depth, like basically biographies about what their charges were, what charges were dropped, why they went. A lot of it, as always, is just that poverty, not having access to meds, that misrepresentation. And I think those two things were what I put into my second Fulbright application. And that's why I kind of was able to move forward because I think I had more of a purpose at that point for why I wanted to do it, as well as being adopted and a couple other things. But I think those two things and just these men who often did not have room to speak for themselves and were put into situations that were beyond their control and oftentimes very stigmatizing and painful and just not representative of who they were or how anyone deserves to be treated was why I was like, yeah, let me see what extra research I can do around crime and stigma there that may happen as a causation to poverty. So that was kind of how I got to that point. So I went in, I would say, wanting to study just mental health and crime in general, as well as poverty, and seeing how that trifecta kind of affects the outcome for people of color. So,
That is wonderful. Well, not wonderful. I think the story is horrible, but it's wonderful that you were able to change kind of your trajectory and learn so much from that, because I think it's
Yeah,
also something that so many people will probably benefit from hearing. I think that that is just
yeah,
so amazing. So tell me about the research that you did at Manchester. Tell me a little bit more
yeah.
about that and what that was
So
like for you.
So I actually, before I got on, I was like, I know we're going to talk about this. So let me look back at my Notion notes to figure out how I got here. And oh my God, I was like crying. It was I mean, in a good way, it was such a beautiful journey of just like a lot of it was just me advocating for myself in what I wanted to research. So absolutely loved my courses, became really close friends with a lot of people. Um, I loved the professors, I loved the teaching. I definitely bonded with a couple of professors. One of them I still talk to daily, and he became my supervisor. His name is Felipe. The coolest. I went in a kind of like just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about like all the change I can make and all the things I could study. I feel like honestly, my faculty thought I was kind of like way too ambitious because I straight up went in saying, I just want to study mental health, crime, poverty, and race. And they were like, okay, but what is your focus? And I was like, that's my focus. Like, we're going to be studying these things. We're going to see how they all impact each other. And they're like, yes, but for them, they're used to little thesis statements. And so there was a lot of just like, okay, so how are we going to craft this? It's just funny to me because it took me getting back to the US to actually figure out what I wanted to do for my dissertation, which was like a year after, and I was such a, like, high achiever. I normally have things, like, planned, but it just took me a while to get to where I wanted to get to. So I was thinking about, like, what classes and what things actually prepared me. So one of my classes I did was, like, a research design class. So that was pretty it was actually not my favorite taught class. If I'm being honest, I hope this person does not listen to this, but, like, it was not well done. And so I really felt like at that point I had wasted the class because I didn't do well. Like, I didn't know, and I had come directly from undergrad in a completely different system, and we don't talk about enough how, like, coming from another country to another English speaking country is still difficult because the metrics are different, everything is very different. And so I came in very, like, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and all that stuff, and it was just, like, not it was fun, and it was great, but it was also really, like, a culture shock. So that class was really difficult, but it started to teach me more about, like, how to hone in my ideas. But actually, I think the class that kind of helped me the most was a class that I took with Felipe was one of the presenters. It was basically a class on, like, drugs, and how they affect society in the UK specifically. And he actually did a course on more of the like historical problem with drugs. So he started to look more into the stigma around using drugs, people that use drugs, what's going on. And I actually became pretty, I don't know, I would say I became pretty hooked on one of these laws in the US actually that was like 1914 about the cocaine epidemic and specifically how Black men were viewed through that. Like, there was a lot of, like, as you can imagine, based on the time, like, referrals to them being, like, animals, being crazy, being fiends, and all this stuff. I don't know what you can keep and not keep, but I was disgusted and honestly appalled. I mean, I wasn't surprised, but I think that kinda set my mind on the trajectory of I can actually research something that has to do with how these people are stigmatized. Like, and so I kind of was like thinking in the back of my head, I would just stay in 1914. So with our class, we had a fall semester and then a spring semester and then the dissertation. So the dissertation was last. And so in my mind, it definitely went last because I just had so many courses throughout like the two periods that it definitely was the last thing I thought of. Those courses were definitely helpful, and I used a lot of them for, like, future for, like, interviewing people. We had a qualitative analysis class, which basically helps with interviewing skills. I used that for, my article that I did, like, definitely helpful. But I would say, I had another supervisor before Felipe, and he was really, 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 really pushing me to do a policy brief. Like, he was like, "You got this, do something easy," and he definitely I'm not trying to be, like, rude, but he was definitely like, "You just wanna get this over with." Like, you just want to get this over with. It doesn't matter what you write about. You just write and get it done with. That's all you need to do. It doesn't matter what you write about at all. Nobody's going to read this. And so, yeah, I came back to the US like in July. So at that point, I hadn't thought that much because I just finished like everything else. I was like, yeah, I think I'll just do like a policy brief. But I just could not wrap my head around it. Like, I was like, there's no empirical evidence. There's like nothing I'm actually saying. There's nothing I'm vocalizing. So the dissertation was due like in September. And so I told him straight up in, I think like August, I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And he was like, "Well, then I can't help you." And was like, "You need to stick on the course that you're going with." And I was like, this is not something I'm passionate about. This is not something I'm going to enjoy writing about. And if I have to write 15,000 words, I want to enjoy what I'm writing about and I want it to make a difference, even if nobody else ever reads it. So Felipe, who had taught that other class about drugs and kind of talked a little bit about like stigma, and he is Hispanic, and he was the only other person, like, of color on staff, so obviously we bonded. So, we just kinda started talking about, more of my actual hopes and dreams for what I could write. So shout out to people that actually, like, respect you enough to realize that you may have a clue what you're doing even if you go outside of what they're thinking. So we just dreamed and we thought about it. So at first, after that whole cocaine fiend epidemic thing that I was looking at, I was like, I really wanna see kind of how this goes throughout time. And so I was gonna section it in parts, like, which was insane. And I understand why my other supervisor was like, "We're not doing this." Because I was like, "I wanna look at the 10s, and then I wanna look at the 30s, and then I wanna look at the 50s, and then I wanna look at the 70s." And he was like, "Yeah, that's too much." And I was like, "It is too much." So I ended up, like, breaking it into, like, names. So I ended up getting to 2020 and calling it the George Floyd time. And so it kind of went from there. And so I'm trying to look at my notes because I kinda had it written out how it kind of, yeah, so that cocaine fiend panic, and how the stigma gets weaponized was kind of my idea into stigmatization and policy harm. So there was a lot of like decisions and back and forths. And like at first, I was like, okay, so maybe I could actually look at a person who has been impacted by stigma. And I was like, I don't really know who that is. There have been so many people throughout history. And a lot of what I was looking at too, which is a little bit different, but I was looking at how Black men have been somewhat impacted by stigma and how it's affected like white women as well, like that correlation. And so basically with that, I was able to see like kind of how it doesn't just affect the person, but it affects how other people groups see the person and then affects how they interact. So I was like, I think that George Floyd may be a good example of this. So I kind of went there. And then I was talking with a friend and I was like, what if I compared it to someone else who was also stigmatized by police brutality? So I started by looking at like Michael Brown, but I was like, maybe I could be ambitious and like do that thing I was wanting to do and go back. So go back to like Rodney King, one of the first people who was like widely publicized on the news. Now there were a lot of other people before him, obviously that were suffered at the hands of police brutality, but he was one of the first that was really broadcasted and seen on video. So I was like, this could kind of work. And so I absolutely started hitting and running. I got like 20 books, read them all in a couple days, started doing a ton of stuff on Notion. I was like researching, outlining, highlighting, and then I ended up realizing I wanted to do this through the media. I wanted to see how did the media see men after they are affected by police brutality. So I ended up using the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. I did 52 articles in all and put them all in Vivo, which is a coding place where I coded how they were perceived by the media. And it was like I used, I think, from like the date that they were unfortunately either beaten or killed to that next year to see how, if anything, changed throughout the year. And honestly, the results were not good. Like, it was very sad. Like, not much has changed. I mean, I'm not sure in this climate if that will remain the same, but I feel like we tend to use more politically correct words, but still words of like intimidation or he was doing the wrong thing or he asked for it or he was big, he was scary to justify police brutality against these men. And so I was really pleased with my result. It was one of the hardest things I've ever written. I was able to read Rodney King's biography, which he has one, and then also George Floyd. He has a biography. Well, Rodney King has an autobiography. George Floyd has a biography that was written by two men from the Washington Post. So I was able to read both of those just to get more of their actual insights from their friends and family. And that kind of was like what inspired me, I guess, to continue going. It was hard to read, but it was definitely worth it if I could give them a little bit more humanity in the midst of the pain and suffering that it caused not only them, but their families and their friends. So I was really honored to do it. But yeah, it was definitely not easy.
Yeah, gosh, that's incredible that you were able to do it. If there's like a way for people to read it, I will link it in the description
Yeah. Okay.
so people can learn more and read it themselves. You were going to have a great answer for this, but my last question for you is what advice would you want to share with young people who might want to make change but don't know how to get started with that work? What advice would you want to share with them?
I would say start by listening first and then acting later. I definitely think that there is something that comes from listening to shared experiences that can get your hopes up. I definitely think that action is important, but I also think that you have to have something to say. If that means reading, if that means reading books that are important to you, just so that you can debate with yourself or with other people, do I believe what this says? Do I not believe what this says? And kind of having a little bit more of that push and pull as you figure out how you want to go about making change. I think that it's scary, but you have to start somewhere, and that in our world, we need more people who are vocal and who are unafraid to make a difference. I know for me, I was able to get this job that I do now, which is case management and help these men. It might not always be my job, but it's something where it's really divine. And I'm able to actually make a difference and carry out what I studied because these men could also endure, unfortunately, what George Floyd and Rodney King both experienced, or so many other Black men. So I just think that it's important for you to find what you're passionate about and then learn more about it and then go for it. I think that that's the best way that you can make change and then write about it. I was able to write an article that I'm really proud of for Prism, where I got to intersect both my work with these men and also my dissertation work and bring them together and represent one of the fathers in our program. The best part of it for me was he emailed me and said, "Thank you for doing this." And it touched me so much. I was actually crying in the car because this is a very dear person to me. We've been through a lot together in class. I've been able to see him grow so much. And so giving him the chance to have a voice, trauma informed, listening to what he needs, was just one of the coolest things ever. So I think that's what you got to do. You got to put yourself out there. You got to learn, you got to read, and then find out what you want to say. Did Suzanne Collins say, I don't speak, basically summarizing, she said, I only speak when I have something to say. I don't speak just for whatever. I think Lucy Gray Baird said that. So I think that's really important. Find what you want to say, find your niche. God knows we need it right now. We need more people who are able to, contribute to the world in positive, impactful ways. And then I think the last thing I would say is never dismiss that your voice counts. Your voice definitely counts. And there's a place for you. We have enough people talking that should be quiet and don't have anything positive to say. So be one of those voices that actually makes change. So those would be my thoughts.
It was so great to catch up with Lucy, and I think we probably could have talked for way longer about her research and all of the work she's doing now. I did chat with Lucy a bit after we recorded, and she mentioned that while we talked a lot about her work with Black men, she's also very interested in looking at the intersectional experiences of Black women and people in the LGBTQ+ community as well. But we all have to start somewhere. And that brings me to my key takeaway from this conversation because I loved Lucy's advice. I want to remind you all of how powerful your voice is and how much we need people to speak out about injustices, corruption, and all the other crap that's going on around the world right now. So please keep that in mind. Change comes when you understand that your voice counts. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can find Lucy on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I included those links in the description of this episode. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at Be The Change Media Network. I am working on expanding Be The Change Media Network, which means bringing you more inspiring stories from amazing guests and incredible hosts. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave the podcast a rating and a comment, because it will help these stories to reach, educate, and inspire more people. And of course, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.